Some books stay with you throughout your entire life. Because of one, I've always seen wardrobes as doorways to other worlds.
Now this is a beautiful piece. Lovely three-quarter length wardrobe, made circa 1850.
It seems very sturdy. If I was to lean against the back and exert quite a lot of pressure, would it give way?
Not at all, it's very, very solidly built.
I've got to get to Narnia, you see. I've got to get into Narnia. Narnia? Trying to get into... No. That's my trouble. I've never been able to look at wardrobes in terms of their ability to hold clothes, because that's not what they're for.
Of a white Christmas, with every Christmas card.
The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is much more than just an entrancing read. It's a fairy tale set against the backdrop of the world at war. And like all the best fairy tales, it's not just for children. If you're into sort of cliched characters and predictable plots sort of washed down with lashings of ginger beer, then this isn't the book for you. And that's one of the reasons I really love this book, is it's not twee and it's not patronizing to its young readers. It's not comfortable. The book begins in the London Blitz and tells the tale of 4 brothers and sisters evacuated from the city and the magical adventures that befell them.
This story is about something that happened to them when they were sent away from London during the war because of the air raids. They were sent to the house of an old professor who lived in the country. It was the sort of house you never seemed to come to the end of, and it was full of unexpected places.
With those words, C.S. Lewis began a children's story that was to become an epic tale of good and evil. I've no doubt it's the greatest children's story ever told. When I was a little girl, I was obsessed with stories and filled my time by writing them. My poor mother was forced to listen to them in serial form. We'd go for these walks on the beach and I would tell her the latest installment. I'd sort of made them up as I was going along, really. Reading was really important to me. I remember getting The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe from the library, opening it up, and it had this unique smell. It felt like there was really magic held in the pages. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is so effective because the story is told in such a simple but elegant way. It's a book you can really get into. The adventure unfolds on a rainy day when the kids are all cooped up indoors. During a game of hide and seek, Lucy, the youngest, tries hiding in a wardrobe and finds herself stumbling into another world. Her chance discovery changes the 4 children's lives forever, all because of an ordinary-looking wardrobe. What Lucy discovers is the enchanted world of Narnia.
A moment later, she found that she was standing in the middle of a wood at night time with snow under her feet and snowflakes falling through the air.
One of the great things about this book is there's absolutely no hanging around. Within 5 pages, Lucy's transported from Britain at war into a totally different world. And it's believable. You're not thinking, yeah, right. And that's a really difficult thing to pull off. And he manages it because Lewis is a master of storytelling.
Why do you whisper green grass?
Clive Staples Lewis, known to friends and family as Jack, grew up in a large, rambling house in County Down, and there's definitely a sense of Jack's Irish boyhood in the book. Up in the attic was a large wardrobe made by Jack's grandfather, and Jack and his elder brother Warnie used to sit in the wardrobe and tell each other stories. This was the beginning of what would become a lifelong fascination with myths and folklore for Jack Lewis.
Yes, you did. You told them once before.
You don't always know as a child that people are thinking and feeling the same things that you are. And when I read The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, it was like a revelation because it was like not being alone anymore. And oh, what I wanted more than anything else was to get into this magical land that Lucy had been before me. Lucky thing. I'd be playing as a child and I would see a little fraction of light coming through a leaf or some trees, and I would stare and stare at it, and I would imagine that in there, held in that little patch of light, was a big fairy city or some other world. I had a very solitary side and I could enter into my own little world at the drop of a hat. No change there then, because somehow it was more interesting and more appealing than reality. What Jack Lewis had created was a world that made perfect sense to me, a world that I could escape to, walk around in, and explore. Just after Lucy's arrival in Narnia, there emerged from the shadows a character that would light up my childhood.
Lucy heard a pitter-patter of feet coming towards her, and soon after that, a very strange person came into the light of the lamppost.
Oh, goodness gracious me. Oh, allow me to introduce myself. My name is Tumnus.
I'm very pleased to meet you, Mr. Tumnus.
And may I ask, oh, Lucy, daughter of Eve, how you have come into Narnia?
Narnia? What's that?
This is the land of Narnia, where we are.
Through Lucy's eyes, I was seeing a new world. Narnia is populated by the most unique characters you'll ever meet, like a charming half-man, half-goat, or faun named Mr. Tumnus.
Come from the wild woods of the west?
I got in through the wardrobe in the spare room.
I just don't know what to say about Mr. Tumnus, because every time I think of him, I just want to cry. He's just like, oh, Mr. Tumnus, if only the world was full of you. When Lucy returns from Narnia, she runs to tell her brothers and sisters, and no one believes her. No one believed her, and oh, so frustrating. And probably because she was the youngest and she was a girl. And I must admit, I probably identified for that because I was the youngest and I was a girl and I was a little bit victim. I was convinced when I was reading it that if she'd been a boy or if she'd been the eldest, they would have believed her. And it just goes to show how completely I believed in the world that Lewis had created. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe began with what Lewis called pictures in his head. The image of a faun, complete with umbrella, had sprung fully formed into his mind when he was 16. And the key to the magical quality of his writing is that even as an adult, he managed to hold on to those childhood visions. But it wasn't until nearly 30 years later that the pictures that had lain dormant in Jack's mind were to come to life on paper in the form of The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe when he was here, in Oxford. He was a professor of English at Magdalen College, and amongst his closest friends was J.R.R. Tolkien, author of Lord of the Rings. But Lewis's world is miles away from Middle-earth. He has a real immediacy and an amazing lightness of touch. Not a single word is wasted. In The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, Jack Lewis drew upon his own childhood love of storytelling and wrote more like a loving uncle than the well-respected academic he'd become. Lewis really knew how to hold a child's attention, and in less than 200 pages, he managed to create a world just as complex as the one he found himself in. This book is much more than just a fairy tale. While Narnia was developing in C.S. Lewis's imagination, Britain became a country at war. Western Europe during World War II was a terrible, chaotic and frightening place, so much so that people were willing to send away their loved ones in order to protect them. Tens of thousands of children were sent away to escape the war, and as happens with the kindly old professor in the book, several evacuees came to stay with Jack Lewis. He later said that he never appreciated children until the war brought them to him, and was shocked by how little the children read. The children from the city seemed to know so few imaginative stories, so he decided he would try to do something about it.
Them that's got shall get, them that's not shall lose.
The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe was Lewis's first book for children, and just like 30 years earlier, he first told the story to his brother Ronni. While Lewis sat in one room writing the story by hand, in the room next door, his brother typed up the manuscript of a book that would charm generations and go on to become a classic of children's literature. And this is where he wrote it, and I can't tell you what it's like for me to be in this room with this typewriter, which it was written on, knowing that the whole Narnian world was called into creation from this point. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe and the other Narnian books had a real influence on me. Not always in a positive way, in some ways quite detrimentally so, because the day I realised that I was never going to be asked back for tea by a little half-man, half-goat back to his woodland home, I knew life was going to be a letdown. And in comparison, it has been.
Mama may have, Papa.
Despite the escapist fantasy elements within the story, Lewis was certainly drawing from the world around him, and the darkness of Europe at war was firmly established in Narnia in the shape of an eternal winter. The children had stumbled into a rather beautiful snowy landscape, but this was no ordinary winter because Narnia was under a spell cast by an evil tyrant where it was always winter but never Christmas. The White Witch, the self-styled Queen of Narnia, is a real piece of work. She's some girl. Very cold, calculating, manipulative, femme fatale.
Stop! And what, pray, are you?
My name's Edmund.
Is that how you address a queen?
I beg your pardon, Your Majesty, I didn't know.
Not know. The Queen of Narnia? You shall know us better hereafter.
As you follow the Queen through the book, her character develops. She's not just a pantomime villainess. She's an intricate, highly complex, multi-layered pantomime villainess.
I repeat, what are you? A great overgrown dwarf that has cut off its beard?
No, Your Majesty, I've never had a beard. I'm a boy.
A boy?
This is really a book about betrayal. And Edmund, Lucy's spiteful and particularly nasty elder brother, is one of the most compelling characters in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Only moments after discovering the doorway to Narnia, Edmund is in the clutches of the White Witch, who realizes she can use his weaknesses to her own ends.
Poor child. How cold you look. Come and sit with me here on the sledge, and I will put my mantle around you and we will talk. Perhaps something hot to drink.
You see, the human children have a hidden significance in the world of Narnia. According to ancient Narnian folklore, it's their arrival which will bring about the end of the White Witch's reign. And so rather than destroy Edmund, the witch pumps him for information and puts him under her spell.
Have you come to Narnia alone?
As a child, you can see things that other people can't, and that's what's so special about Lewis's writing. He understood that, and he realized that the only way to reach children was to see the world like they do. While at the beginning of the book nobody believes Lucy when she comes back and tells them about Narnia, eventually all 4 children get pulled into the story.
Shh, look.
What?
There's something moving among the trees over there to the left. It's a kind of animal. Look, quick, there it is. It wants us to go to it, and it's warning us not to make a noise.
Are you the sons of Adam and daughters of Eve?
We're some of them.
Shh, not so loud, please. We're not safe, even here.
Why? Who are you afraid of? There's no one here but ourselves.
They're the trees. They're always listening. Most of them are on our side. There are trees that would betray us to her. You know who I mean.
When did you last come across a book with a talking beaver? This story has a lot more in common with Animal Farm than Winnie the Pooh. I always think of the beavers as being like the wartime resistance. Remember that at the time of writing, World War II was still a very raw and recent memory. Although on the surface Narnia is firmly in the grip of a reign of terror, it's populated by animals with attitude. Mr. Tumnus and his friends are part of an underground movement to overthrow the evil queen, and the children get to play a central role in this resistance movement. They're signed up to the cause by a pushy beaver who takes them home to meet the wife.
Here we are, Mrs. Beaver. I found them. Here are the sons and daughters of Adam and Eve.
So, you've come at last. At last! To think that ever I should live to see this day. The potatoes are boiling and the kettle singing, and I dare say, Mr. Beaver, you'll get us some fish.
The beavers are the most beautifully drawn characters. Even when they're cooking tea for the children, there's a real process behind it. Cakes don't just arrive on the table. They go out and catch fish. Things a little bit, smells a bit fishy and damp, as it would in a beaver's house. Although the last beaver I went to visit had IKEA everywhere. Very sophisticated beaver, but that was in North London. Over tea with the beavers, the children learn that the adorable Mr. Tumnus has fallen foul of the White Witch.
And now, do please tell us what's happened to Mr. Tumnus.
Ah, that's bad. That's a very, very bad business. There's no doubt he was taken off by the police. I got that from a bird. Saw it done. It's no good. But now that Aslan is on the move...
Who's Aslan?
Aslan? Why, don't you know? He's the king. He's the lord of the whole wood. But not often here, you understand. Never in my time, or my father's time. But the word has reached us that he's come back. He's in Narnia. At this moment. He'll settle the White Witch all right.
Aslan is talked about in hushed and reverential tones long before we actually meet him, and Lewis plays up this suspense. His character is built up to be even less approachable than the Queen, so you can't help wondering who this could be. He seems to be the only one who can save Narnia from the clutches of the evil witch. But you don't really know anything about him. But just before we're about to find out, something substantial happens. One of the children turns out to be a traitor. While the rest of the children are deep in conversation with the beavers, Edmund has crept off to keep his deal with the evil queen. But first, he has to get past the Queen's guard.
Who's there? Who's there? Stand still, stranger, and tell me who you are.
If you please, sir, my name's Edmund, and I'm the son of Adam that Her Majesty met in the wood the other day. And I've come to bring the news that my brother and sisters are now in Narnia quite close, in the beaver's house. She wanted to see them.
I will tell Her Majesty. Meanwhile, stand still on the threshold, if you value your life.
I remember reading it thinking, typical boy. Needless to say, I was furious with Edmund. Furious with him. It really did annoy me and made me angry. Although I didn't blame him for being seduced by the Queen. Something about the dark side of the book is very appealing. Yet just as Edmund is meeting with the evil Queen, the other children are experiencing a change in Narnia.
It's a new dawn, it's a new day, it's a new life for me.
Finally, there's hope.
And I'm feeling good.
And as the children flee across the snowy landscape, the ice begins to melt. The spell of the White Witch is weakening, and all around them, Narnia is coming back to life. The coming of spring to Narnia has echoes of the moment Britain finally emerged from the shadows of World War II, and a new spirit of optimism was sweeping across the land. The Festival of Britain symbolized a new start for a scarred, traumatized nation. It's as if Lewis had managed to get through the wardrobe door himself and see the world from the vantage point of a ward just won. The thaw of the eternal winter is due to the arrival of the book's mysterious central character, a magnificent lion called Aslan. The children, when they finally meet him, appeal to him to help them find their brother.
But where is the fourth?
He has tried to betray them and join the White Witch, O Aslan.
Please, Aslan, can anything be done to save Edmund?
All shall be done, but it may be harder than you think.
Under the laws of Narnia, the penalty for Edmund's act of betrayal is death.
You know that every traitor belongs to me as lawful prey, and for every treachery, I have a right to kill.
At this point in the book, the battle between good and evil reaches its climax, and in a beautifully written, incredibly moving scene, Aslan makes a deal with the Queen. He sacrifices himself to save Edmund's life.
Muzzle him.
Effectively, he dies for Edmund's sins.
Lewis was initially skeptical about religion until his friend Tolkien converted him to Christianity. And he approached this by tapping into Lewis's fascination with stories and myths. In The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, there are strains of Roman, Greek, Celtic and pagan mythology. And what Lewis does with, I think, such great skill is blend all these elements with his own imagination.
And the result is not always a cozy experience. Aslan is muzzled, bound, humiliated, and then killed. It's a terrifically moving scene, one in which you can't help but feel the despair and loneliness of the children left alone in Narnia. As the terrified children look on, a group of grieving mice gnaw at the ropes to reclaim the corpse. With the death of Aslan, the last hope of the 4 children has disappeared. It gets to the point where the girls bury their heads and faces into his fur, and you can almost feel it on your face. It's so vividly described. Yet this is a fairly unforgiving scene in its depiction of cruelty and horror. Narnia is not a powder puff wonderland, but dark and scary and dangerous too. The sacrifice of Aslan is an emotionally wrenching, spiritually charged scene, one which has been compared over and over again with the crucifixion of Christ.
Over the years, Lewis has been vilified, particularly by lesser writers than himself, for the Christian elements that run through this book. But to criticize a writer for infusing their work with their own influences and beliefs is like criticizing bakers for using yeast in their bread. It's the very sincerity of this book that makes it rise above the rest. Whatever your age, race, color, religion, this is still just a great story.
A story which so far has already lasted for more than 50 years. These days, children's stories tend to follow an all too familiar formula. You know, an orphan who against all the odds wanders about saving the world with his own peculiar brand of magic. But the Narnia Chronicles are much more profound than that.
Have you realized what we are doing?
You just get the feeling that it wasn't written to push the right buttons or to make a fortune. Jack Lewis was really, really, truly writing from the heart.
If you want to know what happens in the end, then read the book. And if you have read it, then read it again. It'll reawaken the childlike wonder that so often gets knocked out of us. And while you're at it, read them all. There are 7 books to the Narnian Chronicles. It gets better and better. And I envy you if you haven't read them yet, because you're in for such a treat and you get to discover them for the very first time. The world is a better place for having had C.S. Lewis in it. The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe is a timeless classic, It has enriched my life and the lives of countless other readers. So, vote Narnia. There's a whole world out there. And remember, fairy tales aren't just for children.
Well, for Ronni Ancona, the fairy tale kingdom of Narnia is a world that makes a lot more sense than this one.